So Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has been speaking to the media in the last few minutes. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
Call this morning specifically to demonstrate my solidarity with the Jewish community here in the UK and let them know that we're going to do everything in our power to keep them safe. Last week I met with the Community Security Trust and police chiefs. We provided more funding for the Community Security Trust. That's the organisation that helps keep schools, synagogues and other Jewish community institutions safe. We spent time with the police to make sure they have all the tools, powers and guidance they need to police protests over the weekend appropriately and strike that right balance. And it's a difficult job, but I'm grateful to them for everything that they've done. They've made several arrests, but they're also now reviewing footage of some of the things that many people will have seen that are just simply not acceptable, and where they can, they will be able to make further arrests. But I'm determined to ensure that our Jewish community is able to feel safe on our streets. There is no place in our society for anti-Semitism, and we will do everything we can to stamp it out, and where it happens, it will be met with the full force of the law.
Now, you were asked by one of the children just now, where is the line between protesting for Palestinians and supporting Hamas? It's a great question. What's your answer? Well,
Hamas is a proscribed terrorist organisation. It's very clear under the law that support and glorification of Hamas is illegal, and those offences are punishable with up to almost 14 years in jail. The police have that guidance. They know that. That's why I met with them specifically last week in advance of this weekend's protest to make sure they were crystal clear about what's okay and what's not okay. But it's not just about Hamas. More broadly, actions that incite violence or stir up religious hatred and racial violence are also not acceptable, and that's why, as I said, there's no place in our society for that type of hatred and division, and it will be met with the full force of the law where it happens.
Now, it's a fast-moving situation in the Middle East. Is there anything you can say at all about the half dozen or so British citizens who have been taken hostage by Hamas? Is Britain working with the US to keep safe routes open, and what's our role in the humanitarian effort?
Yeah, it's one of the things that I've been discussing with students here today who obviously have family and friends that are impacted by this in Israel. Now, we're doing everything we can to provide support. I know it's an anxious time for many families who will have loved ones who are impacted or missing. We're providing all the consular support through the Foreign Office that we can, and also providing direct support to the Israelis. And the humanitarian situation is one which, of course, we're concerned about, and that I've raised in all the calls and interactions I've had with other leaders from across the region, and in particular making sure that we can try and get the Rafah crossing open. That will ease the humanitarian situation. That's why I prioritised speaking with President Sisi of Egypt early on last week to talk about that, and we will continue to do everything we can to alleviate the humanitarian situation on the ground, including moving some of our Royal Navy assets into the region who can provide further support as required.
Now, nobody challenges Israel's central aim right now to destroy the terrorist group Hamas, whose barbarism shocked the world. The debate, the worry for many, is the hundreds of thousands of civilians in Gaza, and whether now military action will mean large numbers of casualties in that group. Do you share that worry? Do you urge Israel to show restraint and discipline to avoid casualties in that group of people?
We have to remember that the entity responsible for all of this suffering is Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organisation which has perpetrated a horrific act of terror which has caused the death of over 1,000 people. Israel does have every right to defend itself and its people, to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. I think that's what the Israeli people would expect from their government, is that if something like this happened here, it's what people would expect from this government, to make sure that they take the proportionate and necessary steps to keep everybody safe. Now, I've raised with the Israeli Prime Minister the need to minimise the impact on civilians best we can. I've raised the humanitarian situation. We will continue to do that with other allies around the region as well. But again, Israel has given people advance notice of what's happening, given them the opportunity to leave, and it's Hamas who is now telling people to stay behind. It's Hamas that is embedding itself inside civilian populations, and that is just an example of the barbarity with which they operate. They are not doing the right thing by the Palestinian people by those actions, and they should be held accountable for that.
Do you worry where the end game of all of this is, that it could be an open-ended occupation by Israel of Gaza?
I think Israel has been very clear that Hamas is the entity that's responsible for this, and what they want to do is ensure that their people are safe and that this doesn't happen again, and that the focus of their attention of self-defense is on Hamas. And I think that's right. Nobody wants to see regional escalation. Certainly the Israeli Prime Minister does not. When I've spoken to him, I've been speaking to other leaders around the region. All of us are united in not wanting to see regional escalation. And again, that's something that we can help with. We've already sent surveillance aircraft to the Eastern Mediterranean last week. They will be able to, as I said, make sure that no arms shipments, for example, are being sent to other terrorist organisations in the region. That's a practical step that we can take to help ensure that this remains contained to dealing with Hamas and does not spread more broadly in the region.
Finally, domestically, Prime Minister, you're having to rewrite sentencing policy today because you've all but run out of prison places. You've had to scrabble around and redo the Network North announcements because your government announced funding for projects already completed. Your government told schools the wrong funding figures for next academic year and are now having to explain why you're reducing that figure. You came in replacing Liz Truss, promising competence. Are you embarrassed?
No, I think when it comes to HS2, I took the right long-term decision for the country, which was to say that we would take that £36 billion and instead of expanding HS2, that we would spend every penny of that money on hundreds of other transport projects around the country that will benefit people far faster and in far more ways than the types of transportation that they actually use. I think that's the right thing to do. Every single penny of that is new. It will make a difference to people. And just a couple of weeks' time, bus fares, for example, we're going to have to rise to £2.50. They will now be able to stay at £2 as a result of that decision, so the impact will be felt very quickly. And again, I appreciate that not everyone agree with me on that decision, but I think that is the right thing to do for this country. That's the type of change that I want to bring. That's the type of Prime Minister I'm going to be, because that's how we're going to change the direction of our country.
But do you accept that there have been some mistakes made in recent weeks?
No, we're always striving to deliver for the British people, but with regard to HS2, that is an enormous project. It took the time to go over that properly, and I'm not going to make any apologies for that. People would expect me to go over that in detail, given the sums of money involved, and then come to a decision that's right for the country. That's what we've done. And there's, of course, going to be people who disagree with that. There's lots of people who have been invested in this project for over a decade, but the facts have changed. And I think when the facts change, we've had a pandemic, the costs have skyrocketed. It's right to have the courage to change direction, and that's what I've done on that project. I get that people will have their own view, but I think the right thing is to take every penny of that money, £36 billion, and spend it in hundreds of projects in every part of our country that will benefit people far quicker. I think that's the right thing to do. Not an easy decision, but the right long-term one for our country.